Hi, friends. This episode of Big Blue Banter is brought to you by Prize Picks. Head on over to Prize Picks and use promo code BANTER, and they'll match up to $100 on a new deposit. Thank you and enjoy.
Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato, and this is Mailbag Part Deuce, the second part of the Mailbag. A lot of questions. We love this. I love this. And we start off today with a nice little 30,000-foot view question from Scott G. And I want to point out something that we might get to right now. Somebody said to me recently, Nick, Dan, what about a 40,000-foot view question? I said, you know what? Nope. This bad boy gets capped at 30,000-foot view. And I said, can you take me higher? No, you cannot take me higher. It's 30,000. That's the max. You asked me before when I was humming that song before we were recording why that was in my head. And could somebody, I think, reply, can you take me? Actually, you know what? I actually feel like that was a very good Creed impression.
I actually think it was too.
I have a good Creed voice. I can do Creed and I can do DMX. We won't do DMX.
You can do DMX.
I have a pretty solid DMX voice. We're not going to do that right now.
That's
though.
crazy.
Another time. But Scott G asked a good 30,000-foot view question to start us off. And he says, based on reports, it seems as though there will be a chance for a competition at quarterback. At this point, I think we know what Daniel Jones is. If Drew Lock does win the job and has a Geno Baker type resurgence, do you think that if that leads to them re-signing him, that could actually set the franchise back long term?
There is certainly a scenario that would set the franchise back long term. I don't know if it's certain. Depends on how big of a jump we expect Drew Lock to have in Brian Dable's system. If it's similar to what I think Geno was the archetype to look at. Geno has put two, I would say, solid seasons together. The first was better than the second. The second was a little bit plagued by injuries. What Joe Schoen and Brian Dable would do in that situation, if he had a Geno year, a 2022 Geno year, is they would do their damnedest researching every freaking quarterback coming out. And if they didn't love those quarterbacks, they would go with Drew Lock on a contract, not to the level of Daniel Jones, but one that they could get out of after 2 years. I don't really want that to happen. I want the solution to be in place. But yeah, I can see a scenario where it ends up biting them in the ass, similar to what happened in 2022. I hope they would be a little bit savvy enough to not allow that to happen.
It's a very interesting question. If he were to have that kind of resurgence breakout, I would even call it, with Brian Dable, they might be looking at it the same way they looked at Daniel Jones 2 off seasons ago, where they said, look, he's young. He's only 26. Lock will be, I guess, 26 or 27. He's just learning our system. There's room for him to improve within our system. He's just kind of getting his feel for it. And Geno Smith signed a 3-year, $75 million contract, Nick, with $40 million guaranteed. That was similar to the Baker Mayfield contract. Daniel Jones signed a 4-year, $160 with $80 million guaranteed, and that turned into like 92 after they restructured it right away. So just interesting. Like, even when you look back at that, it's kind of crazy to me that the difference in the contracts that they got. I would think it wouldn't be similar to the Jones contract, the 4 years, $160. I think it would be closer to a 2 or 3. But I think at that point, it's fair to ask if that'll set them back even further as a franchise. If what the goal is long-term, which Nick and I have stated countless times, is compete for divisions consistently, compete for Super Bowls consistently. I'm not so sure no matter what Drew Lock can do this year, he can prove to them that he is that guy. But in that sense, I almost wonder if you're better off in that scenario, instead of being like, oh, we can build on it. It's first year in the system. He's still kind of young. Let's re-sign him because we have no other options in the draft because we won games. Similar to what they did with Daniel Jones. I wonder if they'll be better off Nick being like, you know what? We've done that before. We see the route it takes. We're going to have to sell some. We now at least have the leverage or the flexibility to sell something different to our fan base. We can be like, guys, we're not doing that again because, look, we already proved to you it doesn't always work. And we'll just go to the market and sign a whoever that season's is, the Gardner Minshew of this offseason or the Tyrod Taylor of one offseason. For the 10 mil price or the 9 mil price tag or whatever it would be at that point for that veteran quarterback, and you roll the dice and you put yourself in a position that could be different for the future if you can if it helps you find your quarterback. I still think goal number one has to be find whoever that quarterback is that you believe can be consistent division winner, consistent Super Bowl competitor for your franchise long term. And if that's Lock, that would be one thing, but I think he'd have to do a lot to prove that personally. I think they learned, I don't want to say learn from their mistake, Nick, but I think they learned something throughout this process.
Also, you don't hate the benefit of a rookie contract if you roll with Drew Lock. Drew Lock's getting paid peanuts now. If he played really well, you would give him that Geno type of contract, and now he's making a shit ton of money, eating a lot of your cap. That's a situation the Giants shouldn't find themselves in. Again, Rohan S. asks, How much of DJ's lack of vision behind the pocket stems from the hits he's taken? To me, it's less of that and more of Jason Garrett forcing DJ not to throw interceptions, trying to understand if he can be resurrected since he's got the tools, but we may be too late.
My answer would be neither. I think that if you really unpack this thing and you did the work on it and you remember the film, you remember what work you've done, you'd understand that Daniel Jones's vision behind the pocket has been bad since Duke. He average depth of target at Duke in his final season was 117 or 113 out of 117 quarterbacks. He threw short of the sticks more than any quarterback, except for like 5 or 6 that year. He had a really bad over the middle percentage, did not use the intermediate middle at all at Duke. Cy, who we've had on the podcast, David Syverson, had the best scouting report on Jones. He said, I just don't see it. I think he has slow eyes. And he did have really slow eyes at Duke. And those slow eyes have converted over at every step of the way at the NFL level. Even 2022, the guys were quote unquote faster, but not really. It was check your first read and just come off it quick to run through the B gap. And that worked until defenses said in 2023 and during the stretch run of 2022 when he went 3-7-1 and it was kind of hidden and masked by his 2 games against Indianapolis and Minnesota, that we're not going to give him the B gap anymore. We're not going to let him run through the B gap. And then we started to see last year and during that bad 3-7-1 stretch run of 2022, a lot of scrambles, rollouts to the right, cut off half the field, nothing there. Again, leading to bad vision, as you would say, behind the pocket. So I think this is what he's been as a prospect since Duke, and I just don't think it ever has improved. I don't think it has as much to do with Garrett. And if you talk about 2019, remember, it's one of the most overrated memories of a lot of Giants fans. Yes, he had 24 touchdown passes, but I think like 11 of those came against 3 teams, and there were 2 teams that quit on their coach and 1 bad defense. His EPA was really bad in 2019. His stats and EPA, raw advanced stats and film, were all bad against all the good defenses he faced in 2019. And he also had the benefit of no defensive coordinators having any film on him. Remember what we always say. Defensive coordinators around the league will tell you we need 8 games of tape on a rookie quarterback, and that's when we can start to take away the concepts that he likes. This happened with Davis Mills, who had a really good rookie season, then is nothing. This happens with a lot of quarterbacks. So I think we have to factor that all in and think less of, 2019 he was great, and then Jason Garrett ruined him, and more of this is who he was as a prospect at Duke, and it just didn't take the jump at any point. Now, as far as can it be resurrected, the Giants obviously believed it can. That's why they signed him to that big contract last offseason. They believe he can evolve as a processor within this system. And to that point, they probably still somewhat believe that because, and I say that because they might look at last year as we couldn't really get a chance to, and they've said this as much. Joe Schoen has at least, and I don't really totally buy things that Joe Schoen tells us publicly about anything. So I think there's a PR spin behind it all. But he's told us that he believes it was hard to evaluate him in 2023 with the O-line situation. So I still think there's a chance. They thought there was a chance. Let's see if he can do it, man. Let's see if he can learn to process this offense a lot better.
Bull Bittler asks, now knowing they were all in on May and no one else, Caleb too, we know they like DJ somewhat, and we have a pretty good idea that they liked Allen. Using those 3 quarterbacks and using the prospects they didn't like, do you two have an understanding of what type of quarterback they're looking for?
I would say no, and I'll tell you why. And I think there's an idea of it, but I'll tell you why I don't think it's a full understanding. There's no confirmation on this because he wasn't in play, but I have heard from somebody that I believe is reliable that they were involved in discussions with Chicago back in January, and that the number 1 player by far on their board, by far over Drake May, was Caleb Williams in a tier of his own on their board. And Caleb Williams is a 6'1" quarterback. So I can't just sit here and say they have the type. It's the Drake May, Daniel Jones, Josh Allen, because all Drake May, Daniel Jones, Josh Allen are the same type, right? They're all 6'4" or 5. They're all bigger. They have a good frame. They're athletic. They can throw on the move to an extent with Jones, but the rest of them can throw on the move. They have an arm to throw downfield. Some process better than others, but they have an arm to throw downfield. Caleb doesn't fit that entirely at 6'1", in my opinion. He might even be less. Is he 6 foot? I think he's 6'1". So I don't think it's a type. I think they are probably looking for explosive throwers who can throw and take advantage of the intermediate vertical areas of the field. But I don't necessarily think the Giants have a type. I think we might see ultimately when they do, if they do get a decision to make a quarterback decision of their own and bet on their own, depending on next year, the year after, we'll see when it happens. I think it might be someone we don't expect from that standpoint. If we're all just penciling in this pigeonholed idea that they like the Allen, Jones, May type of prospect, we might be surprised if the right guy that they really have a good conviction on doesn't fit that mold.
Yeah, they want a smart quarterback who uncorks the football and accesses every piece of land on the football field. That's what they want. And if he has mobility, that's great. But they want somebody who can do all of those things. And Daniel Jones doesn't necessarily fit that archetype, but Daniel Jones was also a 25-year-old ascending prospect that they decided to sign after the Giants had their first winning season in quite a while.
Yep. John G asks, you guys have touched on the idea of the NFL not being set up for offensive line development, but is it possible we're just excusing bad offensive line coaching? It seems like the top offensive line coaches, Dante Scarnecchia, Stoutland, Callahan, develop guys that aren't every down starters.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent point, John G. I think the NFL right now with the rules, the limited practice that the NFL players are going through relative to what they used to when like Howard Mudd was the offensive line coach at the Indianapolis Colts, it hurts development. But I still believe the best offensive line coaches tend to get the most out of every player that they get. And I think they do a great job not only developing the individual offensive lineman, but the offensive line as a unit. Whereas a lot of the offensive line coaches the New York Giants have had in recent memory have failed to do both of those things. So I think you have a great point here, John G. And that's why Scarnecchia, Stoutland, and Callahan and the offensive line coaches like that get paid so damn handsomely by the franchises that are blessed enough to have them in their presence.
It's a great point, John, and it's a great point of discussion. I would answer it to say maybe it's kind of like the haves and the have-nots at quarterback that we always talk about. How I always say it's one of the most difficult jobs to do in America, and I make that as a joke because obviously rocket scientists, things like that, but there are more great rocket scientists than there are consistently elite quarterbacks is my whole point. But I kind of feel like it might be the haves and have-not at offensive line coach. And because of what Nick said, because there's less time to practice, less time for development, the ones who are actually that great and teaching the right things in the right way with the limited time and resource they have stand out more and make more of a difference. Scarnecchia, Stoutlands, Callahans, all those guys. Now, maybe they have an even greater impact than they had in past years when you can find more good offensive line coaches. And that may be something we've seen, right? There doesn't seem to be that many elite offensive line coaches out there right now that are still coaching, or at least not to my knowledge. So it's definitely something intriguing to think about. I don't know how you get those guys, right? Like I've always said, like, just throw the bag at Mike Munchak. I know he doesn't want to move from the West Coast. His daughters are all over there. He's got his grandchildren now. But what if you told him, I'm going to make you the highest paid offensive line coach in the history of football? Would he do it then? Because you know who doesn't give a shit about paying that money? John Mara. He's paid dead cap with Odell Beckham. He's going to do it next year with Daniel Jones. He's probably okay with the money, so why not? But, you know, it doesn't seem to happen. They never have done it. So it's an interesting point.
What's going on, Big Blue Banter listeners? I'm excited for the football season for several reasons. And one of those reasons is Prize Picks, which is North America's largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform. And it's so simple to use. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including professionals, sharks, and people who are going to exploit you, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you just watch the winnings roll in. It's very simple to play and gives you a little extra skin. I've set my picks in less than 60 seconds. There are so many stats to choose from, and the withdrawals of funds are easy and quick. Dan and I will be adding a segment to our show before every game where we pick our favorite stats, more or less, yards or touchdowns, what have you, and we'll be discussing why from a scheme, matchup, and game theory perspective. I love their promotions and how easy their interface is to operate at Prize Picks. I may select more on tackles for a loss from Bobby Okereke or Kayvon Thibodeau next game. They also do other sports as well. It's a really cool experience. Please join Dan and I in the fun of Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. You will not regret it. You ever feel sluggish or out of focus? Are you stressed? Has your digestive system caused discomfort or flatulence like a certain co-host on this podcast during a live stream? If so, you should check out AG1. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my daily health. I had more energy, I was better off at the gym, and I could focus on my work in a much more efficient manner. That's because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. Not only did I replace my multivitamin with AG1, but I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. I recommend AG1 to all my family and friends because AG1 has a team of doctors and scientists that formulate around the latest science and maintains high quality standards within the industry. Even my friends have started drinking AG1, and they always tell me how energetic they feel and how it's helped them out at the gym, and also it's helped them manage their stress levels. That's why we're happy to have AG1 as our partner. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. Go to drinkag1.com/banter. That's drinkag1.com/banter to check it out. Our mental and physical well-being is of the utmost importance. Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all need to take that very seriously. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New York, New Jersey, Arizona, if you will, or hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/banter to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/banter. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. And before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, include EE System.
Okay, Rumpelstiltskin asks, two-part question. What players do you see having a breakout year this year? Okay,
let's tackle that one first until we get into the next one. I really like this next one.
Yeah.
So who's having a breakout year? So a player that has not broken out yet. Has Kayvon broken out yet?
So this is an interesting question. I think you can do players that have broken out if they're going to take a next step in their yeah.
I think that's fair. But to me, Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas, I don't know if they could take like a next step.
I agree. They wouldn't be.
Yeah, so they don't qualify. Okay, cool. So we're on the same page. Brian Burns is a player who could take a next step. I think Kayvon Thibodeau is a player that could take a next step along with Deontay Banks. But where my mind was going is there any players on the offensive line that could take that next step to where it's a breakout year? I'd be emphatically happy, man, if it could be Evan Neal. I don't know. Like, I think a next step for Evan Neal isn't a breakout year. Like, what is he breaking out of at that point?
Well, I mean, if he can become a consistent offensive lineman, that's almost like a breakout, right?
I guess so, right? So it really could breakout such an ambiguous. It's such an ambiguous term. I don't exactly know what that means, right? It's going to be like how we interpret it.
This is also, do you see, Nick? So I want it to be like not just like the possibilities. It's like, who do you see if you had to put your money on?
All right, those three players that I named: Kayvon, Burns, Deontay Banks, and then I'm kind of at a loss for words. If we want to throw neighbors in there, if the rookies can have a breakout, So I think it's just those three.
I'll go with. So I'm definitely
Bellinger too. But I feel like we say that every year, and he does. But he was capped last year because of the Darren Waller situation.
I'm not going to include him in this for this sake of this discussion, because I think a lot of what he does for the football team is more going to be on film than it is, in the true sense of the word, or
he's a lunch pail guy, man. He's a
lunch pail guy in the common sense of the word breakout. But I will say this to add to the three you said, if I had to put my money on it, and I hope I'm right about this, and I hope the Giants did some self-scouting on this and looked at some of the things he did so well on tape at college from a move standpoint, and then work it into their offense more, feature it more, make him the featured guy on these plays. And it's John Michael Schmitz. I'm going to put my money down that he can have a breakout year. He did not have a great rookie season. In a lot of ways, he didn't have a good rookie season. I think there are, like, I didn't love his projection. You all know that. Like, I felt like taking a 24-year-old like that in the first round to me was absurd. And in the second round, I was okay with it, felt okay at the time, but Again, I look at this class, and I would rather have Ben Powers Johnson. And to be quite frank, I'd probably rather have Zach Frazier. And those guys were both available in the same range
Ben
for
Powers
draft.
Johnson.
Oh yeah, I always call him Ben Powers Johnson because there was like a Ben Powers.
Yeah,
and
Ben
I actually
Powers,
did
man,
that
of course.
online and on the tweet, and it killed me. Someone's like, "What his name's?" Some guy who now doesn't follow me and isn't a fan of the Giants is just like, I guess, tweeting, searching for this guy. He's a fan of Jackson Powers Johnson. It's like, his name's Jackson Powers Johnson, asshole.
Oh, he hit you with an a-hole.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, dude, I'm sorry. I said the wrong name. Like, does that make me an
That's funny,
asshole?
man.
I guess on Twitter it does. In social media,
Incompetence surrounds me.
that's crazy. But yeah, like I still think though there are aspects of his game and the film that I really like, Nick, and it's the move. I think they could use him in a better way. To his athleticism, his movement skills. There's a clear difference watching guys like him move to the second level than there was watching guys like Will Hernandez, another high draft pick who they took in a similar range to JMS. So I'm putting my money down that JMS will have a breakout year. That's my other guy I'm adding to the mix.
Hey, if he has Runyon and Illuminor starting next to him, he's going to be in such a better. He's going to be in such a better position than what he was in last year.
But I want the Giants to make the effort to get him on the move and focus on the things that he does well. I would love to say Wandale and Hyatt, but it's too dependent for me on the quarterback situation, which I'm uncertain about.
That's why I didn't say the receivers.
I'm not going to say them. You said Banks.
I still think Wandale could because he does play into this quarterback.
Right.
So I think you just the 6 yard, check down, and then Wandale can make
this quarterback. But until we see it on the field, I'm not certain this quarterback can generate a passing offense. He's averaged 6.8 yards per attempt or worse his entire career. He throws for like 200 yards a game on average during his entire career. So just like the production is just not there from him. I hope he can take the jump, but it'll impact all the receivers. The film will still be great for Wandale, but the actual true sense of the word breakout, it requires the quarterback as well. Any receiver does. The only ones I want to throw in there in the mix, Nick, in addition to that, I've got to put my money down on it. I want to say I'm intrigued by what Pinnock can do in Shane Bowen's system.
Okay.
He's on the verge for me. I'm not going to put my money in. I'll put my money on JMS. I'm not going to throw my money down yet for that. I want to say I'm intrigued by the potential of Cordell Flott as an off-coverage corner on the outside of this system, but I'm not going to put my money on that either. And corner is a tough position to project and get right on. So, yeah, I'm with your guys plus JMS for me.
Okay, let's get to the second part of this question,
Yeah,
and I absolutely love this. Who are your top 5 Giants from the Tom Coughlin era, asked by Rumpelstiltskin?
And I want to answer it like this, Nick, but you can tell me if you want to answer it the other way. I want to answer top 5 favorite Giants, not necessarily top 5 best Giants, because that one's too easy. And it's not that easy. I think it's just like anyone can kind of answer that. I would think it's more fun to answer our favorite Giants, because they may not be the best Giants. Okay. So you want to start or me?
Yeah, take it away, bro.
Okay, I'm all off the top of my head. Just guys that come to the top of my head. Ahmad Bradshaw, he comes right to the top of my head. One of my favorite Giants of all time. Love the way he ran the football. Love the toughness he ran with. The fact that he was somehow able to, and this changed the fortune of this franchise, come up with the football after he fumbled it from, who was that? Richard Seymour? Not Richard Seymour, the even bigger guy. Vince Wilfork.
Vince Wilfork, yeah.
How he came up with that football in that pile to this day will amaze me. And I can't explain it. But it changed the fortune of our life as fans and the Giants' fortune as a franchise. That wasn't the only thing he did, but that was the one that comes to mind. Ahmad Bradshaw, one of the toughest, best players, a 7th round hit. Next guy for me, don't know why I missed him in the first. This is not in any order. It's just top of my head. Eli Manning. I loved Eli Manning. He's my favorite Giant in the history of the franchise. I understand he had his flaws as a quarterback. I don't think we had Mahomes when we had Eli, but we had someone who showed the F up in every single playoff game they ever played. He played his best ball, including if you go back and watch his final playoff game against the Packers. He did not have a good 2016 season by any standard, a great 2016 season by any standard. He was elite in that playoff game out of nowhere because it was the playoffs. I'm sorry, not Hakeem Nicks. Sterling Shepard dropped the touchdown. Odell Beckham dropped the touchdown. Odell Beckham dropped the 4th down pass that would have changed the game. Those are all right in the receiver's hands. Eli dimed them up, and they just weirdly dropped the ball. I don't think it had to do with the boat thing, but it just was dropped. It was cold in Green Bay. Eli played so good in that playoff game.
Wasn't cold in Miami.
It wasn't cold in Miami. Eli in the San Francisco championship game. Unbelievable. Eli in Green Bay, that championship run, 2011. Unbelievable. Eli against the Cowboys the year before in the other playoff run. Unbelievable. Like, all those moments, never missed a game. Now we see it. Now we have a franchise quarterback, I call him, a first-round quarterback in Jones, who misses all sorts of games, and plenty of teams have this. Anthony Richardson was out for the year last year. A lot of quarterbacks get injured all the time now in the NFL. Eli never missed a game until he was benched for Geno by McAdoo. He never missed a game due to injury, and he had some bad injuries. And he'll write a book about it one day, or he'll go on a podcast and talk about it. But that injury, that Chiefs year, where he got injured against the Chiefs, he should have missed like 2 to 4 weeks minimum. I think it might have been like 4 to 6. He's playing the next week, and he had a lot of those injuries that he played through. So I don't need to wax more poetic about him. There's so many more things to talk about, but I'll just stop it there. So Bradshaw, Eli, that's 2. I mean, these are easy. It's hard to say because they're also some of the best players, but Justin Tuck, I always love Justin Tuck and OCU Manure. I'll put them both in there as 3 and 4 for me, as just some of my favorite Giants. I loved having pass rushers like that from the Coughlin-era. And then one more. I get one more pick. Oh man, there's so many I like. I want to say there's some honorable mentions: O'Hara, Snee, McKenzie. But I'm going to go with Antonio Pierce because I just love the way Antonio Pierce played football. He was one of the smartest linebackers I've ever seen play the position. And that play he made in 2007 against the Packers, when they called the most perfect screen I've ever seen called in my life by whoever the coach was. I think it wasn't McCarthy back then. Who was their coach then? It was like, was it the guy who was before? I don't know. Whatever. That screen had 3 blockers ahead. It was the game-changing play. Favre threw it. And Pierce fought through 3 blockers on a screen, clear path, and somehow made the tackle. One of the greatest individual plays I've seen on a football field. So those are my 5.
By the way,
it was McCarthy still. Wow.
Yeah.
So those are my guys. Those are my 5.
Yeah. So if I had to name 5, I think Dan hit all of them. Obviously, Eli. There's a couple more players I'll just throw in there. Michael Strahan, obviously. I love the fact that he hated Tom Coughlin and wanted Tom Coughlin fired, and then essentially completely flipped when he saw Tom Coughlin had a human side to him. And that's really says a lot about teaching and instructing and how you have to look yourself in the mirror. Tom Coughlin did that to the betterment of the New York Giants. And Michael Strahan understood that too. And now he's like, I love Tom Coughlin. Right. He is the man. So Strahan, but we're talking about Hall of Fame type players. Richie Soybert. Richie Soybert is one that I want to throw in there. Richie Soybert had a devastating lower leg injury, knocked him out. I don't remember exactly what season it was. He's like, oh, this guy's career is over. He ends up coming back and being a linchpin on the New York Giants offensive line. Antonio Pierce would easily have been one. You want to know one that I loved until 2006, really, but I loved it. He was my favorite player growing up as a kid. It was Tiki Barber. I love Tiki Barber.
Too, yeah.
Like Tiki Barber was my favorite player. Like, dude, I love it. He's the best.
Yeah.
And then 2006 happened and he started talking about Eli. And I was like, yo, what the heck, man? Like, what are you doing? And then he leaves. He was like 70% of the Giants offense in 2006.
It was.
And that was a terrible season. The Giants sucked down the stretch. They get their asses kicked. And it's just like, oh man, the Giants suck. 2007's going to be terrible. They lose those first 2 games. And then it was just like such a story of resilience, the 2007 season. And if it wasn't for Mike Sellers, I think the name of the Washington fullback was, who got tackled at the 1 yard line. Got tackled at the 1 yard line, I think, by Aaron Ross when he should have went in. The New York Giants probably don't win that season. Steve Spagnuolo might have got fired like 3 games into his tenure because it was so freaking bad.
He might have never got another job. The butterfly effect.
Dude, it's crazy. They lost to Dallas. I think they scored like 40 points or 35 plus points. They lost to Dallas. They get beat at home against Green Bay, and then they're on the verge of losing against Washington. They end up winning that football game. And it's just like, I absolutely
love
what
I'd love to do with you, Nick, if we could ever get our chance to get our hands on it. And maybe both of us can try to work on trying to get our hands on it. I'd love to break down film of the past Giants 07 and 11 if we could find it. I don't know where we'll find it. And listeners, by the way, if you're listening, if you can get us access to all 22 game film of any of those Giants playoff games, what are you laughing at?
That would be amazing, man. I would love it.
I would love to break down those games on film and put it on this page for you guys to watch, and so we can reminisce on it. And it would be so fun to watch the tape of Eli and all that.
And then one more player I have to mention, Amani Toomer. Too.
Oh, I love Toomer. Yeah. I mean, Toomer, some of the plays he made, some of those catches around the sideline, those toe tap catches, the play against Dallas to change that first playoff game in 07.
And another controversial player who Giant fans loved, and then he ended up kind of going the route of Tiki Barber, Jeremy Shockey. But when it just came to like watching him, can you remove the personality and the distraction and him being kind of petulant for not getting the football and being a thorn in the side of Eli Manning, just watching him, he was so much fun. I was a
God.
kid, and I remember my dad being like, "Yo, this guy that we got, he's like really good." And my
Yeah.
dad was right, you know. That's how he expressed how he liked football players. And we drafted this tight end from Miami who was just making dudes look silly. I think it was a game against the Texans in the
preseason game against the Texans. That
where he
passing
ran.
game.
Oh my gosh,
That
man!
was
Like,
one
it
of the
was
most
so much
insane
fun.
plays.
It just sucks that it didn't end successfully for him.
No.
He ended up getting hurt in 2007. He looked like he was pretty pissed off about the situation. I don't know if he was all that thrilled that the Giants went on to win a Super Bowl without him. He ended up going to New Orleans and getting his own chip. So good for Jeremy Shockey. But when you want to just talk about enjoyment watching the sport of football, Tiki Barber and Jeremy Shockey are in that conversation. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, I think they fall out of it because of everything that ensued.
Yeah, and you're right about that. And I'll never forget the moment after Wellington-Mara passed, and it was a day or two later. I was at the stadium with my dad. I'll always remember that game being with my dad.
36-0, right?
36-0 against the Chiefs, and Tiki Barber.
That was against Washington.
Or against Washington, and Tiki Barber literally took over that game more than I've ever seen anyone take over a game. I don't know the exact number. Someone could look it up, but it was hundreds of yards of total offense by Tiki Barber. Just
I think it was over 200,
It was over 200. It's one of the most I am doing this for Wellington kind of for like a Giants legend kind of performance I've ever seen.
And that's the shame of Tiki Barber, because Tiki Barber was also one of those stories of resilience, right? Like Tiki Barber was a part of the fossil era. Tiki Barber was a fumbling machine, but everyone kind of loved him, right? His brother was having a Hall of Fame career down in Tampa Bay. And then Tom Coughlin helped fix the fumbling issue. And he comes back and he's one of the best running backs in the league. And he just decides to retire. And if that's what you want to do, that's all well and good. But you shit on the franchise that you were a part of. The franchise.
And then they win the next year.
And then they win the next
Could
year.
have been there for that.
Well, there's that, but it's also just like it made you look foolish. And that's like an unfortunate thing, because I looked up to Tiki, man. He was my guy when I was a kid, dude. And I hated the fact that it went out that way. But I also love the fact the Giants ended up coming up the winner in that situation.
I also wonder, like, just from a competitor standpoint, Nick, and this may or may not have any role or factor in it, but I know for me, in a competitor standpoint, the way I am, I'm one of the most competitive people. Like, when people challenge me and question me, I sometimes give my best performances, and I'm sometimes like go into FU mode, like kind of like Michael Jordan always talks about. I'm not comparing myself to him, but just from that mindset, that mental standpoint, I almost wonder if, based on what Tiki said, was part of why Eli had the breakout that he had in 2007 and won that Super Bowl. Like, he was in FU mode, like, the mother effer, you said that about me. I'm going to prove how wrong you were. I'm going to prove how wrong you were. Because that is a big motivating factor for me and a lot of other people in life, like, to prove how wrong someone is.
God,
and
man.
I wonder if that played a role in that. If so, thank you, Tiki Barber, for giving me that 07 run. The greatest, nothing will beat that as a fan.
Before we move on from this question, I want you to name one player from that era who is like kind of unknown that Giant fans will remember, but they don't think of when they think of Tom Coughlin. And who is that player for you?
Kavika Mitchell for me.
Okay, one season, Kavika Mitchell.
I needed.
I got one too. Jabril Wilson.
Jabril, yeah.
Love Jabril Wilson.
I love them both.
Both players got a bag, right? And then they just kind of fell off after that. But Jabril Wilson was such a stud at safety for the New York Giants. And Kavika Mitchell's one season, I think he was like a dude from the Bills. He came over and he's just freaking
Bills.
Oh my God, dude. 07.
Those A-gap blitzes, those B-gap blitzes. And also, this is a more known one, but Manningham, because, without Manningham, 11 doesn't happen. Not just like the entire getting to the playoffs, because that passing offense was all the Giants had. In 2011, they were ranked 32nd by PFF in pass pro. They were the 30th best run offense and the 31st best defense, or the 31-30. That's either reversed. I don't know. But either way, it was basically just Eli as receivers and nothing on that team. And then that Manningham made the catch in the Super Bowl too, which was more of a throw, but still an amazing catch as well. Okay. Henry White asks, and you can answer this question too, by the way, Nick, even though you don't love it as much as I do, or love it at all. It's still just like a general question.
Yeah,
I think there's one player I think stands out as the obvious. I thought about this when I read it. There's only one that comes to immediate mind, and I'm curious if you'll get there too. But Henry White asks, if you could play a round of golf with 3 current rostered players, who would it be? It's a fun question. Remember, golf can be just like driving around the cart, drinking beers, having fun.
Yeah, of course. So is this the Giants, I'm guessing?
Current Giants players, yeah.
Dexter Lawrence.
Yes, that was my first one. That's the easiest pick in the book, Dexter Lawrence. It doesn't even get tier of his own.
Yeah, Dexter Lawrence is definitely number one. I've heard some great things about Dane Belton as a person and as an intellect, so I would like to pick his brain. I think that would have to go a little bit bigger if we're talking about New York Giants roster.
You don't have to. It's whatever, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go Dex, easy one.
Easy.
I don't think I'd go Daniel because I've been around Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones he's not the most exciting individual. So I might go like Wan'Dale Robinson. And
I was going
then
to say Wando. He was
Andrew
the other one.
Thomas is also pretty reserved, but he's like a really smart individual as well. He's into music, and I think I pick his brain and get a lot. Kayvon is also just like a bombastic
Another one I was
personality
thinking.
that I think I have to add into this. So I think I'm going to go Wan'Dale, Kayvon, Dex.
When I thought about the question, it was those three as well. It's funny how
Really?
we came to the exact
Wan'Dale too. I thought that
three.
one was out there.
Wan'Dale for sure. He's a fun player. That was my second. I was struggling on the third. I went Kayvon, but I could be convinced in a different third. The first two I'm definitely in on, Wan'Dale and Dex is in his own tier. I think it'd be
It's a
so
good question, though.
Yeah, it's a great question. Now that third one, I like. Who else could I put in that mix? I don't know, but I think it's kind of just that's where it is for me. I would love to talk to Kayvon. He seems like an interesting individual. I wouldn't put Daniel in just because I don't want to talk football when I'm there. I'd love to see how ask Daniel questions about playing the quarterback position, but we're there to have fun, hit some balls, and drink and have a good time. Hit some golf balls and drink and have a good time. So yeah, those would be my picks. All right, Bearded Lumbie asks, they took a chance on Trey Hawkins because of who they thought he could become. Do you and Nick think in this new system he'll show closer to that, or a 6th-round pick is a 6th-round pick? Because they saw something last summer clearly to move Adoree inside, or do you think they just forced that?
I think they forced it a little bit, and I think he was also their best option at the time, which says a lot about the New York Giants roster. So I think a 6th-round pick is a 6th-round pick is the way we should be looking at Trey Hawkins. And if he gives you anything else, that's great. That's groovy. That's gravy. Similar to Aaron Robinson, who is on this roster still, who might play football, and we all forget. And you can't expect anything from Aaron Robinson, but if he gives you anything, that's just a cherry on top of an ice cream cone that hasn't been present for over a year now, for well over a year now, since like week 4, 2022.
Yeah, it sucks what happened to him. And I know
I
when
feel
he
bad
had
for the
that
guy.
injury, it looked so bad. And I heard it was worse than people realized. It was a worse injury. And clearly it's been a bad injury for him. Hopefully he can come back. My answer is the same as Nick's. I tend to lean more toward a 6th-round pick as a 6th-round pick. I hope to get the best out of it, but I don't expect anything out of that range of the draft at certain positions. Corner's one I don't. If you take a running back, I expect stuff. And I think you can hit at that position. Corner is a tough position to play in the NFL. I'm not as optimistic. The physio back asks, hi, Dan and Nick. I hear you say a couple things which appear to me contradictory. For example, you say that that the NFL is not a developmental league, but then you're happy with taking a traits-based prospect who needs work. When does a traits-based guy become too much for the development in the NFL? Cheers, guys. I love the show. I listen all the time from across the pond. Plus, Nick, when you get abused, it's pilloried. It's pilloried? What?
Pilloried.
Pilloried, not pillared, rather than pillared.
So it's so funny. I knew that came off wrong, but I was like, I can't go back now and edit it. That's like a tough word to say, pilloried.
I'm going to be honest right now. I had no idea what that word was, and I've never heard it until he just explained the definition of it. I'm just going to be honest. And you know what?
It's so funny, though, that I'm so glad I got called out on that, because I like thought about like editing it out, because I was like, yo, like that did not come off correctly. That did not come off correctly.
Shows
but
how much more expansive your vocabulary is than mine. I had never heard that word before until now.
All right, but to your first question, yeah, it's not a developmental league, but there's still traits. Like my point about Andrew Phillips, and I'm not even really in love with that pick, but my point about Andrew Phillips is he has athletic ability that just cannot be taught. It's not like you can't think of it like, well, the NFL is not really a developmental league. So if the guy's not perfectly ironed out, that means he can't be developed. No, it just means that they're focusing on the tasks at hand. They're focusing on the game plans, on how to defeat. But you could still learn and refine your craft through playing football and practicing football every day. So, like, I think you're thinking about it from too literal of a standpoint.
I agree with you, Nick, and maybe that's on us for not explaining it as thoroughly as we could have. So I want to follow that up because I think it was a good point by you. It's not a developmental league in the sense that if you're not playing, it's not a developmental league. That's what we mean. If you're just taking these 4th, 5th, 6th round offensive linemen and they're sitting on your bench, they're not developing. But it is a developmental league in the sense that you can develop by playing, in my mind at least. You need to be playing real live games, regular season, to be developing. And traits are very important because you're projecting how these traits will play at the next level, because it's almost everything, in my opinion, as far as projection goes. Because, again, we have to always keep this in mind. The college game that we watch on film, it really does need to be taken with a grain of salt, because 95% of the people that the prospects we're evaluating are playing against and competing against are not going to ever play a single snap in the regular season. Maybe it's fewer than 95%, but it's high. It's above 90. You're playing against mostly guys who will never play in the NFL. Some might make practice squad, some might be backups, but most of the guys will not be starters in the NFL. So you have to project how the traits show these guys might play against all stars of the NFL, the best players. If there was a team, if you could somehow play the best, this is why so many NFL GMs, by the way, and scouts make such a big deal of what goes down at the Senior Bowl. Because in their mind, when they get all these guys at the Senior Bowl, it's like an all-star game. It's like actually closer to what might be at the NFL. It's still not that, because it's all just rookies and prospects, but it's a lot closer than it would be even in the SEC. Bama, LSU, all these teams, those teams are closer, but even all those teams don't have 100% NFL starters across the board or anywhere close. So I think it's really important to just keep that.
And to the Senior Bowl point, you're getting a bunch of kids from all across the country, putting them in one environment. They are hardly sleeping. They're getting to know a bunch of different people. They're having playbooks thrown at them. So you're showing how these kids operate under stress and how they can handle different situations and different coaches and different coaching tips like that. In the East-West Shrine Bowl, they're very valuable to NFL teams. And you can see how leaders come. Like, dude, I was an intern at the Senior Bowl, and I had like 20 defensive linemen that I had to make sure were where they needed to be and when they needed to be there. And I could sit there and I talked to scouts. I gave them detailed backgrounds of how these people operated with me and how they interacted with me. Because some of them were on time all the time. They were very polite. They were asking me questions and stuff like that. And I was like, oh shit, like this is cool. And then there were others who I had to freaking wrangle because they didn't want to go to the meeting to hear about finances. And I'd be like, dude, you got to get down here. And they were real pieces of crap. And they're still in the league, some of these guys too. Some of them aren't. But like, it's interesting to me just because at those events, they say you're being evaluated on everything. You're literally being evaluated on every single freaking thing when you're at those types of events.
And that's what why the Giants have made it such a clear, interest to them, this era, Joe Schoen, to really get to know these prospects, multiple private visits, go down for their own private workouts, really make sure that they're not doing another Kadarius Toney or DeAndre Baker.
But the thing is, Joe Judge, he preached that same shit.
He preached it, but we didn't. In my opinion, he preached it, but he didn't practice what he preached.
When you spent the first round pick on a guy like Kadarius Toney, I remember when that happened. We were like,
you didn't practice what you preached. And even when they asked them, do you remember what he said? He's like, we had a great night at the combine with Kadarius. He had a bubbly personality. For the 30 minutes you talked to him at a combine interview, he didn't say that we had a private workout with Toney. He didn't say we had a private. We know that he didn't have a private visit. He didn't say we had a private worker. He based it all on a 30-minute conversation they had with him, or less. I think it was even at the combine. That's not practicing what you preach. Practicing what you preach is doing what Joe Schoen does. These private visits, these fly out with the Brandon Browns to go see these guys. That's practicing what you preach in that regard. Just another knock on the Gettleman era that deserves to be said.
Bry Guy asks, Drew Lock was graded by consensus ahead of Daniel Jones in their respective draft. Consensus Big Board had Lock at 22, Jones at 30. Has the NFL performance changed their outlook so much that Lock couldn't be the better quarterback in this system?
You ask the pro Jones Giants fans, they'll say, yes, Jones has won a playoff game in the NFL. Jones took a roster that wasn't good in 2022 and won them a playoff game. The answer to that might just be, though, that Locke never got that opportunity to play on a team like that. And the other side of that is Jones also has a 4-year sample size of really bad football. And Locke doesn't have that much of a sample size of really bad football because Locke hasn't started for those 4 years of bad football. And you may say it's not bad football by Jones, but you're going against the raw stats, which are horrific. I've talked about the yards per attempt being 6.8 at his best. I mean, you need to get to at least 7, but it's not just yards per attempt. It's the touchdowns. It's the passing yards per game. It's everything. It's the interceptions and fumbles, which have come down recent years, but at the expense of the touchdowns and the yards. So it's that. It's the advanced stats. He's almost dead last in EPA every year, but the 2022 season. It's the throws beyond the sticks that we talk about, all that stuff. And then it's the tape. So, yes, Jones has had the better season than Locke that 1 year in 2022, but he's given more opportunities. He's also had more bad seasons. So I don't think that there's been much to change the outlooks, in my opinion. I think some might even argue that Locke has more of an unknown because he hasn't had the same opportunities that Jones. It's not an argument. He simply hasn't had the same opportunities as in number of snaps and opportunities to be this QB1 as Jones has had.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Yeah. We don't know yet. We never seen Drew Lock in a Brian Dable system. We haven't seen Daniel Jones coming off of a torn ACL, which is like his third or fourth time suffering a major injury throughout a season. So the situations are completely different. And
remember, by the way, I'm sorry, Nick, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
You're good.
I was going to say, remember, by the way, when Jones came back from the neck injury before the ACL, it looked off, man. The football was not coming out of his hand well. I mean, you look at that Raiders film, there's some weird throws in that game. The pass to Barkley in the flat, 4, 5, 6 yards to the left that just sailed out of bounds. The comeback route to Darius Slayton. Do you remember that one where he just kind of like threw it to the defender, and it was high and lofty. The misses to Slayton on the vertical play in that game. Something looked off after the neck injury, too. So it's not just the ACL. I know he's poo-pooed the neck thing. Oh, it was just a burner or a stinger. But he had neck surgery already a couple years ago. Now another neck injury that cost him a few games, and he came back. He didn't look like the ball was releasing that well from his hand. That I don't think can easily be just dismissed either.
No, and it shouldn't be. John G asks, if Waller returns for 2024, how do you, one, envision Dable using the 3 tight ends, Waller, Bellinger, and Johnson? And 2, how would you like to see them be used?
Great question. How do I envision them doing it? I think we'd probably see mostly Waller on the field because, again, this is the interesting. They'd have an embarrassing wealth of riches from a depth standpoint because they have so many receivers that are interesting. It's hard to not go 11 personnel for the vast majority of their snaps here, which I think is what they wanted to do from the start and will do, depending on if the offensive line can do their part in that regard. But if they do, let's say the offensive line takes a step with the Brasillo and the additions they made in free agency, and they can go to 11 personnel, I think we'll probably see not much Theo Johnson in year 1. That would be my bet, a developmental year for Theo Johnson. Mostly Waller and Bellinger mixed in, some plays with 12 where you'll get Bellinger as an H-back or Waller as an outside receiver, some of the things we saw last year. But I would think that if Waller does return, it means less Theo Johnson than we would get if he doesn't return.
I think Jack Stoll and Chris Manhertz, if Waller returns, one of those guys won't be on the roster too.
There's no way to keep him 5 tight ends.
No. And then Lawrence Cater would likely be gone as well.
Mm-hmm.
DK from BK asks, how do you evaluate Shane's process versus results? Looking at each of his major decisions, they are mostly justifiable given the situation. Saquon, DJ contract, Neal, trading for Waller, passing on JJ, etc. But I can't help but feel we are no closer to competition for the division.
That's a great question. A lot of it comes down to expectation, I think, Nick. Like, do you expect to be competing for the division by year 3? And I know that's the big debate right now on Giants Twitter as we speak today. And the expectation is, yes, by year 3, you should expect that. I have a different opinion of this, Nick. So let me try to explain this in the way I can. I think it's hard to compete for divisions in the NFL and hard to compete for Super Bowls every year. I don't think a lot of teams can do it. And I don't think a lot of teams can say that they can do it. And I think the only teams that can say that they can do it are the teams with either an elite quarterback already established or quarterback projecting to potentially be elite, like where the Texans are at right now with CJ Stroud, for example. So a lot of teams don't get their hands on a prospect like that. And so it's hard to say. Now, you could talk about the Lions, who have done a good job of building their roster up, and you could say they're competing for the division and the Super Bowl. And I think that's fair with a quarterback like Jared Goff. But if you look at the numbers, Jared Goff was pretty phenomenal last year. And I'm not saying he's guaranteed to be that again this year. Could be an outlier. I don't know. But that type of quarterback play is not something the Giants have been privy to at all. Go look at the numbers. Look at his yards per attempt. Look at his EPA. Look at the touchdown interception ratio. Look at the explosive plays from his arm. And he was a much better quarterback than people realized last year. So I don't think he's a good example of the other side of it. So I understand what you're saying, DK. And I think, process over results is maybe a crutch that not Nick and I have fallen on, but it is a crutch anyone can fall on if they want to. You still need the results, but it's harder for me to just bash the results when I just feel like I don't, unless you could get the quarterback and have an opportunity to get the quarterback, which he didn't have with May when they won all those games. We all knew that Patriots game win would come back to haunt them. We all knew deep down that Washington win would come back to haunt them. And it did, because they'd have Drake May now otherwise at 3. But without those opportunities, I don't know how much I can bash the results, but I still think the results matter. Like this year, with what they have, Nick, and the moves they made for Burns and that O-line, they need to win 8, 9, 10 football games. I do really believe that. But compete for a division in a Super Bowl, I can't expect that until they have a quarterback in place.
It also depends on what division you're in.
Sure.
Right? If you're in the AFC West right now, competing for your division
South.
is very freaking difficult.
Oh, I went
AFC South, you can compete.
No, I went the other. I thought you were going with the easy, not the
hard. Oh, yeah. AFC. Yeah, of course. If you're in the AFC South, it's going to be very easy to compete.
What do you think the best division in football is, real quick, Nick?
Best division in football. Now
there was a debate between CJ Stroud and Micah Parsons on this. I think it's the AFC North by far.
Probably. Yeah. Browns, Bengals, Steelers, yes. Ravens. Yeah. That's the deepest and probably the best. Yeah. I think so, because like you look at the Raiders, like are they really like a team to contend with? Yeah,
and then the Browns are really good on paper besides the quarterback position.
Yes, exactly. And they made a more catastrophic mistake than the New York Giants.
I know. Nothing could be worse than what happened with Deshaun.
Of course, results. This is a results-driven business.
It is,
and it is. I don't think you're going to get to the desired results without the quarterback. And I think the people who are holding Schoen accountable for giving the Daniel Jones contract are holding him accountable for that decision. They're saying, well, you decided to give Daniel Jones this contract, so you made your bed, and now you're sleeping in it, and the results do suck. I still think they bought some leeway from winning in 2022, and I think a lot of the ancillary decisions that Joe Schoen has made, they've been the proper process to possibly result in wins, but I don't think those wins are going to manifest if they never figure out the freaking quarterback position. And that's why this is a complex thing. I think it's not as simple as just looking at it and saying, well, they're not winning, so you should fire this guy. I do think there is a sound process, but the catastrophic mistake within that sound process was giving Daniel Jones that contract that they did build a 2-year out in, but now you need to lay in the bed that you made with Daniel Jones. Bringing in Drew Lock, was that enough to make this bed more comfortable? Probably not, but I don't know what else they could have done. They tried to trade up to get their guy. He wasn't there. They didn't value. It all comes down to how you value JJ. And if you didn't think he was the guy to help steer this franchise, don't spend the 6th overall pick on him. Continue to make that bed more comfortable with other pieces and other pillows. I don't know if this analogy is working, but
I like that analogy. I do. And I think, even more specifically, Nick, I don't necessarily agree with those who are like, well, he could have gotten Justin Fields for a 6th-round pick, because I don't think you're definitely right on your evaluation of Justin Fields. They might have looked at the tape and said, Drew Lock gives us much better upside within our system than Justin Fields. And you may think that's the craziest thing you've ever heard based on Fields' talent. But they may look at it like, Fields is one of the worst processors I've seen on tape. We have this already, experienced this already with Jones. Let me see somebody who I think can potentially process this offense better and faster. And to me, processing is going to make the biggest difference in our offense taking a jump. So they may not view it Fields versus Lock the same way you do. And that makes a difference, I think. And the same goes for Russ, who I've heard they really tried to and thought they were going to sign, but he went to the Steelers because he felt like he had a better opportunity to play there. So I think individually, they didn't really have that many options, and I think they view Locke a lot higher than you probably view him versus Fields and those other types of options in that range. And not you specifically, DK, just anybody who feels it.
Dan, I'm fully on board investigating the Justin Fields situation. Like, if the Giants felt like he could be a developmental piece, a 6th-round pick, I would punt a 6th-round pick and a chance at Darius Muasau for the upside of Justin Fields. But you have to make a decision on picking up his 5th-year option, which you're not going to do. Because if you picked up his 5th-year option, I think it was going to be like $25 million against the cap that you would have to eat. And that was never going to happen. Now, you could argue,
when did they have to pick that up by, Nick?
May.
Wow. This May.
Yes. So you wouldn't have picked it up. You wouldn't have picked it up, and you would have been in that same situation with Daniel Jones. Then you could go into the season with Justin Fields and have him compete. I think a lot of it probably did come down to processing, but to the point of the people who are saying that Schoen screwed up, I would not have complained if the Giants took that risk.
No,
and there is a part of me, though, to their credit, there is a part of me that says they didn't do this because it would be a bad look on Daniel Jones in the current state of the roster. And that, I don't love that. And I think there is merit to that argument.
Interesting. Yeah, that I think there's merit to that argument. I don't love that either. So I'm the same page with you and them on that. I think there's more to the Field situation personally. I think Chicago gave him the landing spot he wanted. And, Ryan Poles even admitted that. He said, we worked with him. And he would much rather go to Pittsburgh, and this was before Russ signed, than the Giants, where Daniel Jones is already there making $45
Russ was
million.
there. Russ was there already.
Well, Russ was there already. But even so, on Fields' point, he's like, Russ is there for a $2.5 million 1-year deal, and he's old and he's washed, versus going to play with a $45 million Daniel Jones. It's definitely a better situation for his reviving his career there. So I think that played a factor there, specifically on Fields. But it's an interesting debate. And I'm with you on that. I'm fine acknowledging that might have been a mistake, and also acknowledging that I would feel better about our upside and ceiling with Justin Fields on the roster right now.
100%, dude. 100%. Imagine Justin Fields operating the rushing offense that the Giants had with Daniel Jones.
2022 offense, right?
Yeah.
That
Justin Fields,
run.
Look, we've been open with our analysis on Justin Fields through the tape that we've seen. Now, we haven't gone through all of his all 22, but it definitely seems like there's processing errors there. But if you watched him against, Carolina on Thursday Night Football, I think it was, holy crap, man. The guy has an absolute cannon of an arm. Like, his arm talent, when it's clicking, it's not consistent, is so much superior to Daniel Jones, and he's a much better athlete than Daniel Jones. So I am willing to roll the dice on that for a freaking 6th-round pick. Right. But I don't know if that offer was ever out there for all the reasons you laid out. I think he probably preferred to go to Pittsburgh because he's competing with a washed Russell Wilson in another renowned franchise, and he probably wanted to go play with Mike Tomlin.
Yes, all those things I think played a factor in there, and polls gave him that ability. The second part of DK's question, do you guys have any concerns that we made no trades up or back? I know they tried to move up for May, but from a 30,000-foot view, I feel like we should have been able to make a move up somewhere for a player dropping or back if the board didn't make sense. How many of the other 32 teams made a move? Think about it like that. 31 teams.
I think the Giants wanted, or I think they had a problem with the fact that they only had 6 picks and they wanted those 6 rookie contracts on. So trading up was only going to be for somebody that they were absolutely in love with, like a franchise changing player like Drake May. Trading back, I would have been fine with that. But I think according to Joe Schoen, at least on day 3, he's like, oh, we selected everybody who was number 1 on our board. So they were comfortable with all those players. They happened to fit needs. You can argue, oh, they should have went offensive line. They should have went defensive line. They went with the players that they went with. And I don't know what their other options were. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you should have did this and should have did that. I think they got some good football players. Overall, I like the draft. I don't think it was an A+ draft. I think I said a B+, solid draft. I think you got players who can certainly be contributors. Maybe you reached on 1 or 2, but all in all, I'm fine with the outcome of the draft, even though they did not draft an offensive lineman, because I feel like everything they did in free agency was put in place so they didn't have to draft an offensive lineman if they didn't love a specific offensive lineman at a right value.
Yeah, I think that's a fair analysis of it, Nick, and I don't think we know, but I'll say this. I'm open to the idea that if I were to make a trade back, I wouldn't have wanted to trade up. I'll start by saying that. The Giants aren't in position. I don't love trade ups in general, but I don't think the Giants are in a position anyway, like the Eagles were, to trade up for DeGene because they had all those picks and they were able to accrue so many picks back. Like Nick said so well, they only had X amount of picks. As far as trading back to acquire more, I'm not open to it with either of the day 3 picks. I would not want to miss Theo Johnson, and I would not want to miss Tyrone Tracy. I don't think you're going to get anything from moving back from those picks, really anything, besides maybe the 4th. The 2nd and the 3rd is where it gets interesting, Nick. I would have been open to moving back off the 2nd round pick, and I think they might have even still had a chance of getting Nubin a few picks down, like they did with Wandell, who they probably liked a lot and took a risk. I would have been willing to take that risk. I would have been willing to take a similar risk with Andrew Phillips personally. So that's where it gets interesting for me. The 2nd round pick, especially because that's worth a good amount of capital. I would have been interested, but they love their guy there and they took their guy.
Robert asks, if after the season Schoen and Dable are fired, what would you look back on as the biggest reason? And then he lists the Daniel Jones extension, never get Dable a quarterback to develop any draft pick or trade for a Justin Fields type, or his lackluster drafting, meeting Joe Schoen. It's, I think, Daniel Jones extension, right?
That would be the number one reason. And that bleeds into the other one. Dable never getting a quarterback to develop is no, actually it doesn't, because he would have not had a chance anyway. Even if they didn't extend Jones and they just tagged him last year, record would have been the same. They have the 6th pick. Patriots won't trade back from 3. Washington won't trade back from 2. Chicago won't trade back from 1. So they wouldn't have had that anyway. So it is the Daniel Jones extension.
I want to ask you, how much do you think, this is all conjecture,
Sure.
How much do you think John Mara had to do with the Daniel Jones extension?
And yeah, I'm happy that you qualified this as saying this is all conjecture. So it's just a guess. You know what, Nick? I won't even guess that. I think it's not that it's in bad faith to guess it, because I think it's for fun. We're just doing this for fun, though some people would view that as bad faith. I just don't know the answer to this type of thing, so I don't want to guess it that badly, just because I really am not. I'm just very unsure about what role he played in this.
No, I think that's an appropriate answer. I'm trying to look back on just John Mara as an owner. Like, you can get a vibe and a feel for an owner. We all kind of know how Jerry Jones is as an owner based on things that they've said or done in the past. I know John Mara expressed a lot of contrition over the fact that he believes the organization failed Daniel Jones. So, I mean, maybe it's fair to surmise that he fully supported bringing him back, but ultimately I do think he allows the general manager to make his decisions. I'm just wondering what those conversations would have been like for Joe Schoen to go to the owner and say, I know we just went to the playoffs. I know we won our first playoff game since the last time we won a Super Bowl. I'm blowing this up. Something to me says that probably wasn't going to be a comfortable conversation, or a conversation maybe that must have been had at the time. I'm not trying to excuse Joe Schoen. I'm just saying, I think a lot of Giant fans forget the feeling of the New York Giants fan base after they defeated Minnesota and Ed Donatel shitty defense.
Right. And it's a tough spot to be in. And I don't know if you noticed, Nick, but I had to just move the camera back a little, because I noticed, like, as I was zoomed in, it did look like a Dallas Cow. This looks a lot like, this is so annoying, dude.
I told you that last podcast.
A lot like a Dallas Cowboys show. Sure. Now I have Slayton in the picture, so I feel a little bit better about it. I adjust the camera to this, but now I'm kind of pissed.
Didn't Darius Slayton call you out on Twitter too? Doesn't he hate you? He said, "Oh, no, I hate Dan Schneider."
No, he didn't say hate Tish.
So stupid.
About the Mara thing, though, one other thing I want to add, the only context we have from past is there was a situation, at least from what we've heard, about how John Mara played a role in the Odell Beckham Jr. conversation in the contract there, about how he really played a hard role where Gettleman was like, I want to trade this guy. I want to get rid of this guy. And John Mara's like, give me one more chance with him. Give him one more year. And then they signed that contract because of John Mara believed that Odell Beckham can prove Gettleman wrong about who he was and what he meant to the team. So he did play a role in that Beckham conversation from what I've heard and from what I think even this might not even be reports. This might be just like an accepted thing at this time. So I just was thinking back to that, how that all played out. I remember Mara was very, very, and I remember even reading that like Tish was like, okay, we can trade him. And Mara's like, no, we need to give him another chance and that type of thing.
Yeah, that's why I think it's at least worth a conversation while acknowledging that it is conjecture.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see what we got here. It's probably going to be one of our last ones.
Yep.
Let's go Knicks asks, kind of a statement, but can we maybe pump the brakes on the Howie Roseman can do no wrong sentiments? Here's a list of picks everyone praised, but did they really work out? All right, I want to rule out Nolan Smith, Keely Ringo, Jordan Diggs.
Yeah.
This is me talking right now. Cam Jurgens, Nakobe Dean. Those are all picks I'm going to rule out because we haven't
They just
seen
got drafted. You can't
Yeah.
evaluate them yet. And not to mention, you can't say Keely Ringo. What did they take him with? A 6th round pick?
fourth, but
Fourth
still.
round pick?
Yeah, they
Fourth
traded
round
up for it.
pick. That's not something you can. I understand the point he's making. He has JJ Athea-Whiteside and Rager and some of these busts. Dillard. No one's going to hit 100% on their draft picks. That's not why we think Howie Roseman is so good. We think his process is so good, and he does a great job of striking while the iron's hot, acquiring assets in a unique way, finding ways to buy low, finding ways to sell high, and things of that nature.
The reason why we praise Howie Roseman, which I think is strong, I think this is warranted discussion,
Yes,
is not because of how good of a drafter he is. It's because when he screws up, he finds a way out of it. That's why.
right.
He gave Carson Wentz a huge contract and then went and drafted Jalen Hurts because he realized he screwed up. He drafted Jalen Reagor in the first round over Justin Jefferson, realized he screwed up massively, and then swindled the Tennessee Titans to get A.J. Brown there. And who they just re-signed to this massive contract where they kick all these they kick the void years back and they push the money back and they do such a good job with the cap. That's why Howie Roseman gets praised. It's not because he drafted JJ Arthega-Whiteside in the 2nd round. That's a mistake.
Every GM's going to miss some draft picks. That's just how it goes.
100%. It's because he does the best job covering his tracks once he messes up.
Now, I will agree with you though, and thank you for the question. Let's go Knicks. That maybe we've hyped him up a little too much and we've given him a little too much credit. But I'll say this, man, they are consistently a really good roster, despite what in my mind is not a consistently elite quarterback in Jalen Hurts. And that's very hard to do in the NFL. Very hard to do without a elite quarterback.
And also though, dude, if you look at it, why are they so successful all the time? What are the two areas each side of the ball?
All he does is draft O lineman and D lineman. Even when he doesn't need them, he drafts them.
And they have a coach, and Jeff Stoutland, who can develop them, even though it's not a developmental league, Dan.
Yep. All right, maybe a couple more here, but there's still like multiple pages. So we're going to do what? Want to do one or two more?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, we'll do two more then, and then we'll do the rest on another show. Scuba Steve asks, before we had McKinney, we had issues defending tight ends. Who, in your opinion, this is a great question, is the best option to take over that duty?
So it's probably not Tyler Nubin if we're talking about man coverage. So I think it's going to be Jason Pinnock, probably. And I don't know how exactly they're going to do it, right? I think Jason Pinnock can do it. Dane Belton in certain situations. I think McKinney is a better man coverage defender than any safety the Giants currently have on their roster, and any option to cover a tight end. So the linebackers as well, even though Okereke is good. I think Xavier McKinney was a little bit better in man coverage. I think it's a step down. If I had to pick somebody, I guess I'm just going to bank on Jason Pinnock's athletic ability, size, and range at that point. But I'm not really 100% certain.
I'll bank on, I'll bank on a couple things, but I'll throw Simmons into the mix as a possibility, Isaiah Simmons. But I'll bank on a couple other things. I'll bank on the pass rush, making it more of a moot point, and the system, a lot more zone and some pattern match, some things that you can do different ways to kind of limit the space for the tight end. But as far as if you're going to get man coverage one-on-one matchups, it is a great question, and it is an open-ended question in the sense that the Giants may not have a solution for 2024. It may be something they're working on. They'll have to work on, I should say, next offseason.
Free Defenders asks, what do you make of the Nubin pick? To me, it signals one of two things I don't love. either contradictory logic in their valuation of the safety position using premium draft capital, but not premium contract value. That's where it cuts off.
Oh, I don't know what happened here. I don't. Sorry for you defenders. I copy pasted these in. I don't know if you. I think I did this right. So I don't know what that other thing was that it signaled. I apologize for not getting it. Something else it signaled, which might have been, that they're drafting for need or something like that, would have been potentially what I'm guessing your other thing could have been. But it's a good question because they did just let McKinney walk in a lot of ways. To some, though we never had any confirmation on this, but to some that meant they did so because they don't value the safety position and paying the safety position $17 million a year against their cap. We don't know though, Nick. There could be other reasons they didn't extend McKinney. I mean, this guy did say some interesting things to the media. This guy did have an ATV accident. I know I still think these are human beings and he made a mistake and he made an error. But in the Giants' mind, they might have been like, you're a captain. You shouldn't put yourself in that position. And because you did, we don't want to extend you.
I think it's more so the $17 million AAV.
Probably. That's the main factor. The main factor is they don't want to allocate that cap space, especially when they knew in their minds we have an opportunity to trade for Brian Burns and put the cap there on the D line instead. But as far as what it means, I'm not necessarily sure they're not going to extend Newman no matter what. It might not just be, it's 4 years and done. They could view him as a different option, and he may not be, that same level player as McKinney. He may end up ultimately signing a contract similar to the one Julian Love signed with the Seahawks, and a little bit more of a value type signing type of thing. So that's kind of where I'm at with it, Nick. What about you?
Yeah, I don't think them selecting Tyler Nubin just because safety position is a little bit devalued. I think the safety position is devalued when you're talking about second contracts. When you're talking about rookie contracts, you want to bring in good football players to use them on said rookie contract. So I don't find it to be contradictory from that standpoint. I think they needed a ball hawking safety. I think they needed another body in their safety room, a leader in their safety room. And I think Tyler Nubin can be that player. And he's also a good run defender. He's going to work into every nickel sub package that Shane Bowen wants to conjure up. I think he has a lot of utility to what they're going to try to do. And I think he does, or at least he has the potential to do the most important thing a defensive player can do, and that is force turnovers. So that's why the Giants selected him in the second round.
Yep. I like that answer. All right. That's all the time we have today on Mailbag Part 2. Still a lot of questions to get through. We'll probably get to them next week, I assume, at this point. But we're keeping it on the radar. You will get your questions answered. I will probably post something else on YouTube for the YouTube audience. I like getting them involved, and I know a lot of people, don't get a chance to follow us on Twitter and see the question I asked and want to get their question answered. So we will do that as well. If you did DM me a question, I'm just thinking about this now, Nick. I forgot to read it. I always tell you when you DM the questions, there's like at least a 50% chance my stupid caveman brain is not gonna remember to put it in. I go to the Twitter thread. That's where I get the questions, and now the YouTube. So maybe eventually I'll look back through all the DMs, but that's probably not an efficient system. So if you want your question answered, either answer it on that Twitter thread or put it in the YouTube community. But otherwise, have a great rest of your week. This is not a Dallas Cowboys shirt. It's a Darius Slayton shirt. And we'll talk to you soon. Have a good Go Giants.